made better off by a trade, and you don't let it happen, then society is worse off. Okay? That's the idea of an efficiency loss in economics. Economics is all about trading to make things work more efficiently. When you don't let that happen, you've hurt society. You have a welfare loss. Okay? Because something could have made both people better off. That would have been a good thing to do. You haven't allowed that to happen. Okay? And if we think about it, in both these examples, figure 2.5 and 2.6, there are trades that would have made both parties better off that we're not allowing to happen. So in the labor market case, think about a wage that's above W star and below W bar, lower bar. So wage in that interval. At that wage, workers would be happy, and take unemployed workers. Okay? Unemployed workers would be happy to work at a wage somewhat below W bar. Firms would be happy to hire them at a wage somewhat below W lower bar. But it isn't happening because the government has interfered. That's an efficiency loss. Likewise, look at figure 2.6. Okay? Consumers would be happy to pay a somewhat higher price and get some more gas. Producers would be happy to produce more at that higher price. But it's not happening. That's an efficiency loss. Okay? So an efficiency loss is whenever there are trades that can make both sides better off that don't happen. Okay? And once again, this is loosey-goosey here. We'll make this all more precise as the semester goes on. But it's important to get the big picture concept of what I mean by efficiency in economics, which is trades being made that make both parties better off. The second cost here is what we call allocation inefficiency. Remember in the first lecture, I talked about how prices play three roles in the market. They determine what is to be produced, they determine how it is to be produced, and they determine who gets it. That's called allocation. Price plays a critical role in making sure that the people who want the good the most get it. Because remember, that demand curve is a willingness to pay curve, or a willingness to buy curve. Okay? What that lets us know is the further up the demand curve, the more people want the good. Okay? And we should make sure that those people are allocated that good. Okay? So in a world of equilibrium, we make sure the allocation happens. Anybody who wants the good at a price that consumers are willing to sell it gets it. Someone who wants it, who doesn't want it at that price, doesn't get it. Equilibrium takes care of that allocation problem. But in disequilibrium, it doesn't. So let's consider the gasoline example. Now we have a case where there are many, many people, in fact, all the folks who lie between QS and QD on that x-axis, all those folks want gas at that low price, okay, but can't get it. There's only QS being supplied. So what happens? Well, what happened to folks? You guys weren't alive for this. But in the 1970s, does anyone know what happened when we did price ceilings of this type? Does anyone know what happened? Yeah.
Gas shortage.
Gas shortage. And how did people respond? How was gas allocated in that gas shortage?
We're in lines.
People waited on huge lines. Basically, we couldn't use the price mechanism, so what do? We used the wait mechanism. Okay, just like they used to do in Russia all the time. Okay, and still do. Okay? If price can't, the point is the gas that's limited, that QS, has got to get allocated somehow. In the market, it gets allocated by the price rising until the price is high enough that the set of people who want it at that price get it. With this gas price ceiling, that can't happen. So what happens? Lines for gas. Huge hours-long wait. I mean, this is sort of inconceivable now. Sometimes you have to wait at a gas pump. But pretty much you drive up, you get your gas, you leave. In the 1970s, literally you would wait hours, multiple hours, online to get gas. That was how the gas was allocated in the face of these gas price ceilings. Okay? Now this is in, yeah?
What about things like the government saying you can't shut off someone's gas in the winter, even if like there was like a price ceiling?
Okay, let me come back to that. Yeah, hold that thought for a couple minutes. I want to come back to that. But I want to focus on these gas price lines and why they're bad. Okay? Well, these gas price lines are themselves a source of inefficiency, and why? Why is it inefficient to have people waiting in line for gas? Yeah?
To
They could be working, they could be out making trades that make everybody better off. They, instead of being in line waiting for gas, they could have been at work, working for a wage that they were happy to earn and their employer was happy to pay. So a trade is not being made, unless they're equally happy sitting in line waiting for gas, okay, which is doubtful. Okay? A trade is not being made, which makes both parties better off. What else?
Did the government know about this?
Yeah. Yeah, believe me, they did. But they said, well, gee, we can't let people pay those high prices. Governments face really hard decisions like this all the time. There's another problem, of course, which is what happens with people waiting in line for gas. They're idling and using up gas. Okay, so in fact, there was a direct mechanical inefficiency as well, which is all the gas that was wasted while people idle in line waiting to get their gas. Okay, so that's the sort of kind of inefficiency you're used to thinking about as engineers. Okay, there's a mechanical inefficiency, but the main thing we care about is the allocative inefficiency, which is people would be better, trades are not being made because people sitting in their cars waiting for gas. And that's inefficiency. And that inefficiency arises because we have to allocate the gas somehow. Okay, you can't get around that problem. Remember, we are the dismal science. Okay, we point out problems that cannot be surmounted. You can't get around that problem. That gas has to get allocated somehow. And if you don't let the price mechanism allocate it, some other more inefficient mechanism will arise to do so. Okay? Now, the trade-off, of course, is then you keep the price low, and the government's got to decide, once again, it's the political economy of how the governments make these decisions, and that's not really the point of this course. But that's the kind of decision they have to make. Now let's come, and this will touch on your question. Oh, do you have a question about this?
Well, I just had a question actually about
Yeah.
so isn't it a little bit imbalanced? Because like, wouldn't people need work more than companies need people? Because like, for example, there are a lot of instances when companies think their wages is like $1 a day. People are so desperate for that money that they're willing to pay for it, even though they're not happy for it. You know?
Yeah, I mean, basically, in some sense, you know, the bottom line is equilibrium is where people are going to work for what their company's willing to pay. Now, you could say if people want work more than the company wants to offer it, that's sort of a difficult subjective judgment. But at the end of the day, if people are willing to work for $1 and the company's willing to hire them for $1, then that's a trade which should be made. Except, that's a great example to point out, same person who just said that, well, then tell me what's the benefit of a minimum wage? It's equity. That thing economists like to not think about because it's tricky. Okay? It's fairness. It's equity. It's unfair that you'd work for $1 a day. Okay? And people might be exploited and work for unfairly low wages. Okay? Likewise, it's unfair that we pay a huge amount for gas. Okay? And so we should keep the wage high and the prices low to make it fair. And that's the pro of the minimum wage. Yeah?
I didn't quite get your point about equity because it is giving a few people a higher wage, right? But it's causing so much unemployment. So how is that equity?
Wonderful, wonderful point. Wonderful point. That's because in economics, okay, there's the direct effect and the indirect effect. And the direct effect is what voters understand, and the indirect effect is what we understand. Okay? In the case of gas, it was easy to see. The question, why did the government realize this? Everyone saw the direct effect, which was low prices, and the indirect effect, which was long lines. With the minimum wage, it's harder, because there's lots of reasons for unemployment, not just the minimum wage. So the indirect effect is a lot harder to see. If you're a politician saying, look, I'll raise the minimum wage, I'll make sure you paid more, everybody goes, yay. And then the economist says, well, you have to understand that according to this diagram, that will lead to unemployment. And people are like, whatever, shut up. Okay? So basically, the point is that basically, yes, you're right. But for perceived equity, this is the case. And in fact, but you're right, there's a trade-off. Just like they recognize the trade-off between the price and the lines, there's a trade-off between the higher wage and the unemployment. And that comes to what we'll talk about empirical economics, which is measuring that trade-off. Well, how big is that trade-off? How much unemployment does a higher minimum wage cause? In fact, we'll learn in about 9 lectures that it actually doesn't cause that much unemployment. Okay? It actually doesn't. And so maybe the trade-off isn't that bad. But in principle, there's a trade-off. Okay? Now, that comes to your point about shutting people's water off and things like that, and the government making sure that the suppliers make sure people's water doesn't get shut off. Once again, one way to do that is just say to the water company, you can't shut people's water off even if they don't pay their bills. Well, that's going to mean the water company is going to lose money in those people. That'll raise the cost of supplying water. Okay?